Scrum phase, plan and estimate. This slide provides an overview of the plan and estimate phase in Scrum, as outlined in the SBOKey guide. In this phase, the Scrum team focuses on preparing and planning what needs to be built and estimating the effort required. It consists of 6 important processes. 1. Create user stories. Based on the prioritized product backlog, the team collaborates with stakeholders to write clear and concise user stories that represent customer requirements. 2. Estimate user stories. The team uses estimation techniques such as story points or t-shirt sizing to assess the effort required for each user story. 3. Commit user stories. The team decides which stories they can commit to delivering in the upcoming sprint based on their capacity. 4. Identify tasks. For each committed user story, the team breaks down the work into smaller, actionable tasks. 5. Estimate tasks. These individual tasks are estimated in terms of hours or ideal days to help with sprint planning. 6. Create sprint backlog. All the selected user stories and their tasks are documented in the sprint backlog. This becomes the team's work plan for the sprint, and it is monitored using tools like the Sprint Burn-Down chart. The outcome of this phase is a clear, realistic plan for the sprint that is both collaborative and value-driven. This slide explains the detailed process of creating user stories as part of the plan and estimate phase in Scrum. User stories are short, simple descriptions of a feature or functionality from the perspective of the end user or customer. Let's first look at the inputs. The Scrum Core team collaborates using key inputs like the prioritized product backlog, done criteria, personas, stakeholder insights, epics, and even applicable laws and regulations. Business requirements and guidelines from the Scrum guidance body are also factored in. For tools, various techniques are used to gather and shape user stories. These include user story writing expertise, workshops, group interviews, and Scrum guidance body expertise to ensure quality and alignment. Feedback is also gathered using tools like questionnaires and customer interviews. Now, coming to the outputs. The key deliverables are the user stories themselves, along with the user story acceptance criteria. The prioritized product backlog is updated, and any personas are refined as needed. The main goal of this process is to create well-defined, value-driven user stories that are ready for estimation and sprint planning. This slide highlights the critical inputs required during the Create User Stories process in Scrum. These inputs are essential to ensure that user stories are well-structured, relevant, and aligned with stakeholder expectations. Let's go over each input briefly, although all of these have already been discussed in detail earlier. Scrum Core Team. This team collaborates to define and create the user stories based on their understanding of customer needs and technical feasibility. Prioritized Product Backlog. This backlog serves as the base reference. It contains all the requirements already prioritized by business value. Done criteria. This is a clear, predefined standard that helps the team understand when a user story can be considered complete. It ensures consistency and quality. Personas. These are fictional representations of the end users. They help the team empathize with real users and write user stories that are user-centric and value-driven. Each of these inputs plays a vital role in producing meaningful user stories that contribute toward delivering value through each sprint. This slide focuses on one of the most critical tools in the process of creating user stories: user story writing expertise. The product owner plays the primary role in writing user stories. Using their deep understanding of stakeholder needs, business context, and team inputs, the product owner develops stories that make up the initial prioritized product backlog. Essentially, the complete picture of what needs to be delivered in the project. The aim of this activity is not just to write user stories, but to refine them in a way that they are clear, detailed, and ready to be estimated and worked upon by the Scrum team. Sometimes, the product owner may involve a business analyst to support this process, especially when the complexity is high or specialized domain knowledge is needed. While the product owner often does this individually, user story writing workshops can also be organized, bringing together various stakeholders and team members for collaborative story development. This tool ensures the backlog is not just a list of tasks, but a well-crafted roadmap aligned with customer expectations and business value. This slide highlights the critical output of the Create User Stories process, which is the user stories themselves. User stories are designed to follow a specific, predefined structure. This standard format keeps things simple yet effective when documenting product requirements and user functionality. A well-written user story answers 3 key questions. Who is the user? What do they want to do? And why is it important for them? This clarity enhances collaboration and communication across the team, especially among stakeholders, developers, and testers. Since everyone speaks the same language through this structure, it reduces misunderstandings and improves estimation accuracy. Another important aspect is that the prioritized product backlog, where these user stories reside, is not static. It keeps evolving as new insights are gained. This means stories may be added, refined, updated, or even removed as the project progresses and priorities shift. In essence, these stories form the backbone of iterative development, ensuring that the team always works on the most valuable and relevant features for the customer. This slide provides practical examples of user stories from different perspectives within a project. These examples follow the standard user story format. As a user role, I should be able to functionality so that benefit chart value. 1. The first example is from the viewpoint of a database administrator. It emphasizes the ability to revert changes, which is crucial for data integrity and control. 2. The second story represents a web developer's need to track users through logins. This supports personalization, a key factor in user engagement and conversions. 3. Lastly, we have a story from the perspective of a customer. Allowing guest login simplifies access and respects the user's time, which improves user experience. These examples demonstrate how clear, concise, and role-specific user stories are essential for understanding stakeholder needs and aligning the development effort with business value. This slide focuses on the importance of acceptance criteria in Scrum. Each user story has its own acceptance criteria. These are specific objective conditions that must be met for the user story to be considered done by the end of the sprint. Since user stories themselves can often be subjective, the acceptance criteria bring in objectivity. They help answer the question, has the requirement been fulfilled exactly as needed? Acceptance criteria ensure clarity, remove ambiguity, and act as a shared understanding between the product owner and the Scrum team. This makes it easier to validate whether a feature or functionality meets business expectations. These criteria are defined upfront by the product owner and communicated clearly to the team. During the sprint review meeting, the product owner refers back to these criteria to determine if a user story has been satisfactorily completed. One crucial point to note is that once a sprint has started, acceptance criteria should not be changed. It is the Scrum Master's responsibility to ensure that the product owner maintains this discipline, in order to protect the team from scope changes mid-sprint. In this slide, we're presenting a case study example that connects an epic related user stories and their acceptance criteria. The epic describes a high-level need. David, a user, wants to log into his account to save important information for future use. This epic is further broken down into two actionable user stories. 1. The first user story focuses on account creation. David wants to be able to create an account so he can later log in. The acceptance criterion here is clear. The system must allow account creation via both email and mobile number. This ensures flexibility for users. 2. The second user story is from a web developer's perspective. The focus here is on tracking user behavior through unique login information. The acceptance criterion is that every login must store user data, and the system should enable retrieving that information when required. This supports customization of offerings, which is valuable from a business point of view. Together, this case study helps us understand how user stories capture stakeholder requirements, and how acceptance criteria provide a clear definition of done that both development and business teams can agree on. In this epic, the goal is to enable a smooth and secure login experience for the user, David. To support this, we've created a series of user stories that handle account creation, password recovery, and session retention. The first user story ensures that users can register using their email or phone number. This flexibility increases accessibility for all types of users. The second story focuses on password recovery. It's critical that users don't lose access to their account permanently. That's why we've added criteria such as OTP verification and new password entry. The third story is about convenience, the Remember Me feature. This improves user experience by reducing the need to log in repeatedly, especially on trusted devices. Each of these stories has been designed to not only meet functional requirements, but also enhance usability and security. This slide focuses on the process of estimating user stories in the Scrum framework. Estimation helps the Scrum team understand the effort required to complete a user story and aids in sprint planning and prioritization. We begin with the inputs. The Scrum core team, including the product owner, Scrum Master, and developers, are responsible for providing input. The user stories being estimated are created in the earlier stage. Inputs may also come from Scrum guidance body recommendations, which provide estimation best practices or benchmarks from previous projects. Next, we look at the tools used. Sprint planning meetings are crucial for discussing each story in detail. Prioritized product backlog. Review meetings allow the team to revisit and refine story details and understand dependencies. Multiple estimation methods may be used, such as planning poker, t-shirt sizing, or story points. These help assign a relative size or effort estimate to each story. And finally, the outputs of this process. Estimated user stories with assigned values based on effort. An updated prioritized product backlog that reflects more accurate planning. Updated acceptance criteria if the team identifies any additional conditions during estimation. This process ensures that the team commits to a realistic workload in the sprint and helps align product delivery with business value. This slide focuses on the critical inputs and tools used when estimating user stories in Scrum. We begin with the Scrum core team, which includes the product owner, Scrum Master, and development team. These individuals bring in both technical and business perspectives to provide meaningful estimates. Next, we have the user stories themselves. These are already defined and elaborated in earlier steps, and are now ready to be estimated based on the effort and complexity involved. Now, let's look at the estimation techniques, which are collaborative methods used by Scrum teams to assign relative sizes or effort values to user stories. 1. Wideband Delphi. This is an iterative estimation technique where each team member provides estimates anonymously. The estimates are then discussed and revised over multiple rounds until consensus is reached. It helps eliminate bias and leverages the collective intelligence of the team. 2. Planning Poker. This is the most commonly used estimation technique in Scrum. Each team member privately selects a card with an estimate, and all cards are revealed at the same time. If the estimates vary significantly, the team discusses the reasoning behind them before re-estimating. It promotes participation, avoids groupthink, and encourages healthy debate. 3. Affinity Estimation. This technique is used when there are a large number of user stories. Stories are grouped based on relative sizing, e.g., small, medium, large. It's a fast way to estimate and is often done using visual aids like sticky notes or digital boards. It's very effective in early stages when backlog grooming is still in progress. Each of these methods fosters collaboration, objectivity, and transparency, which are essential Scrum values. The result is a set of estimated user stories that are more realistic, helping the team commit better during sprint planning. This slide visually represents one of the most widely used estimation techniques in Scrum: Planning Poker. Let's understand how Planning Poker works. Planning Poker is a consensus-based, gamified technique used by Scrum teams to estimate effort or relative size for user stories. It's engaging, collaborative, and prevents influence or bias from dominating the discussion. Here's how it works. 1. Each team member is given a deck of estimation cards. These cards usually follow the Fibonacci sequence, like 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 13, etc. The logic behind using Fibonacci numbers is that the higher the complexity, the more uncertainty there is, so the gaps between values widen. 2. A user story is presented by the product owner, who also answers any clarifying questions. 3. Each team member privately selects a card that represents their estimate of the effort needed to complete the story. 4. Everyone reveals their cards at the same time. This step ensures no one's opinion is influenced by others. 5. If estimates vary, a discussion follows. Typically, the team members with the highest and lowest values explain their reasoning. 6. After discussion, the team may re-vote until a consensus is reached or an average value is agreed upon. Planning Poker encourages full participation, promotes critical discussion, and leads to better shared understanding of requirements. It also aligns with Scrum values of commitment, openness, and respect. This slide focuses on one of the key outputs of the estimation process: estimated user stories, and how Scrum teams use relative sizing with story points to determine effort. So, what exactly are story points? Story points are a unit of measure used to express the overall size of a user story, not in hours or days, but in terms of relative effort. This effort is based on multiple factors like the complexity of the work, the amount of work required, and the uncertainty or risk associated with the story. The Scrum team collaborates and discusses each story during sprint planning or estimation meetings. Based on collective understanding, they assign a story point value to each user story. For example, a very simple story may be a 1, while a much more complex one might be an 8, or even higher, following a Fibonacci-like progression. Now, how do they decide what value to assign? First, they estimate one baseline story that everyone understands well. This becomes the reference point. Then, other stories are evaluated relative to that story. This approach creates consistency across estimation, even though It's not about absolute hours. Important reminder: every Scrum team will have a different understanding of what a 5 or an 8 means. Therefore, you cannot compare velocity, i.e., story points completed, across different teams. The output of this process is an updated prioritized product backlog, where each story is not only ranked, but also estimated, helping with planning, forecasting, and setting team expectations. Now let's shift gears from theory to a fun practical estimation activity using the Scrum Study Fruit Salad exercise. In this scenario, I will be playing two roles: the product owner, who has already purchased several types of fruits, and also the Scrum Master, who will be facilitating the exercise. You are the Scrum team. Your job is to estimate the relative effort required to prepare each fruit to be served in a fruit salad. The goal here is not to think in terms of time, but in relative size or complexity, just like we do with user stories. We'll be using the planning poker technique. Instead of physical cards, I'd like you to submit your estimates right here in the chat window. Now, as the product owner, I'll start presenting the fruits one by one, and your task is to think about how much effort it takes to peel, chop, and prepare each one. Discuss briefly if needed. And finally, vote using numbers like 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, etc. based on the complexity. This exercise helps us understand how each person may view effort differently, and how we can reach consensus as a team. Let's now look at the next step in the plan and estimate phase: committing user stories. This process involves the Scrum Core team making a commitment to which user stories they will complete in the upcoming sprint. Let's first talk about the inputs. We begin with the estimated user stories, which have already been assigned story points using techniques like planning poker. We also need to consider the length of the sprint. For example, whether we are working in a 2-week or 4-week cycle. Another important input is the previous sprint velocity, which tells us how much work the team was able to complete in earlier sprints. And finally, Scrum Guidance body recommendations may also influence this process. Now coming to the tools. The most critical one is the sprint planning meeting, where the Scrum team, guided by the Scrum Master and product owner, select stories based on their capacity. Effective communication techniques are key here to ensure transparency, alignment, and commitment across the team. The main output of this process is the committed user stories. These are the stories the team agrees to deliver in the upcoming sprint, and these become the basis for the sprint backlog. It's important to note that this is a collaborative process. It's not the product owner assigning tasks to the team. The team itself decides what they can realistically commit to based on their velocity, capacity, and confidence. In this slide, we revisit some of the critical inputs required for the process of committing user stories, many of which we have already discussed in earlier sessions. The first key input is the Scrum Core team. This includes the product owner, Scrum Master, and development team members. It is the team that drives the decision-making in terms of what can be taken up in a sprint. They are directly responsible for planning, estimating, and finally committing to specific user stories. The second input is the estimated user stories. These stories have already gone through a sizing or estimation process, using techniques like planning poker, affinity estimation, or wideband Delphi. The estimation gives the team an idea of the effort required for each story, which helps in determining how many stories they can commit to. And finally, the length of the sprint is an important input. The duration, whether it's 1 week, 2 weeks, or 4 weeks, helps determine the team's available capacity. Naturally, a longer sprint can accommodate more work, but it must also be balanced with sustainable pace and predictable delivery. These three elements together form the basis on which the Scrum team evaluates its workload for the upcoming sprint. This slide focuses on an extremely critical input when committing user stories: sprint velocity. Sprint velocity refers to the rate at which a Scrum team completes work in a sprint. It is a measure of team capacity and is typically expressed in the same units as estimation, such as story points or ideal hours. For example, if the team completes 30 story points in a 2-week sprint, then the sprint velocity is 30. This value acts as a baseline for future sprint planning. A record of the actual sprint velocity from previous sprints is maintained and becomes a key reference for planning upcoming sprints. This allows the team to realistically commit to an amount of work that matches their proven performance. However, it's important to understand that this is not a fixed number. The team also considers any changes since the last sprint, such as team member availability, tool upgrades, technical debt, or external dependencies, to adjust the expected velocity accordingly. In summary, sprint velocity helps teams avoid overcommitment and undercommitment by giving a data-driven insight into what they can realistically deliver. This slide focuses on one of the most important tools used in committing user stories: sprint planning meetings. Sprint planning is a collaborative session where the Scrum team comes together to decide what can be delivered in the upcoming sprint and how that work will be achieved. The team starts by reviewing the estimated user stories at the top of the prioritized product backlog. These are the stories that the product owner has marked as the most valuable and ready for implementation. The product owner must be present during this meeting to provide clarity or clarification if the team has any questions about a user story, its priority, or its acceptance criteria. To ensure the meeting remains focused, it is time-boxed. The standard rule is to allocate a maximum of 2 hours per week of sprint duration. So, for a 2-week sprint, the planning meeting should be completed in 4 hours or less. This time-boxing helps prevent unproductive discussions, especially those better suited for release planning or sprint review. By the end of this meeting, the entire Scrum team commits to a realistic set of user stories that they believe they can complete within the sprint. This forms the sprint backlog, which drives the team's work for the upcoming iteration. This slide focuses on the second key tool for committing to user stories: communication techniques. In Scrum, communication is not just a supportive process, it's foundational to how the team works. Scrum promotes clear, transparent, and rapid communication, especially during planning and execution. Ideally, Scrum teams should be co-located, meaning they work together in the same physical space. This enables immediate face-to-face interactions, reducing delays and misunderstandings. Co-location also fosters trust and stronger team collaboration, which is essential when committing to user stories. However, in today's global and remote work environment, teams are often distributed across locations. In such cases, it becomes the Scrum Master's responsibility to ensure that effective communication tools and practices are in place. These may include video calls, daily syncs, instant messaging, shared task boards, and collaborative workspaces. Regardless of location, the emphasis in Scrum is always on informal, direct, and fast communication, rather than relying on formal, written documentation. This clarity and immediacy of communication is what enables the team to confidently commit to deliverables during sprint planning and to continue working in sync throughout the sprint. This slide outlines the final output of the user story commitment process: the committed user stories. At the end of the sprint planning meeting, the Scrum team collectively commits to delivering a set of user stories from the top of the prioritized product backlog. These are the stories they estimate they can complete within the sprint based on the team's velocity, that is, their historical performance, and capacity. This commitment is not made lightly. It is based on the team's own realistic assessment of what they can deliver. It's important to understand that Scrum emphasizes commitment by the team, not imposition from outside. However, prioritization is still driven by the product owner. This means the team selects stories in the order of business value, as defined in the backlog. The team may negotiate and clarify with the product owner if there are questions or blockers, but ultimately, the stories are pulled from the top of the backlog list. By the end of this step, the team has a clear goal for the sprint. They know what they've committed to deliver, and this focus becomes central to their execution in the upcoming days. This slide highlights the process of identifying tasks, which is a crucial part of the sprint planning phase. Once the Scrum team has committed to a set of user stories, the next logical step is to break down those stories into manageable, actionable tasks. These tasks will guide the daily work of the team during the sprint. Let's begin with the inputs. The two key inputs here are the Scrum Core team, which includes the Scrum Master, product owner, and the development team, and the committed user stories, which were selected during the earlier sprint planning activity. The tools used in this process include sprint planning meetings, where the team collaborates to understand and dissect the work required. Decomposition, where each user story is broken down into smaller specific tasks. This makes it easier to assign work and track progress. And dependency determination, which is crucial for understanding which tasks rely on the completion of others. Identifying these dependencies helps in planning the sequence of execution. As a result of this process, we get three important outputs. 1. A well-defined task list, which acts as the day-to-day to-do list for the team. 2. Updated committed user stories, which may now have additional clarity or adjustments based on task identification. 3. A record of all dependencies, which will help avoid bottlenecks or delays later in the sprint. Ultimately, this step lays the foundation for the team's execution plan. It brings visibility and structure to how the sprint goals will be achieved. In this section, we are focusing on the critical inputs required for the task identification process in Scrum. The first input is the Scrum Core team. This includes the Scrum Master, product owner, and development team. Their combined experience, collaboration, and clarity on the sprint goals make them well-suited to break down committed user stories into executable tasks. The second key input is the set of committed user stories. These are the user stories that the Scrum team has already committed to delivering in the sprint. These stories act as the foundation for identifying and detailing the individual tasks required to fulfill them. Since both the Scrum Core team and committed user stories have already been discussed in detail, we now build upon that understanding by using these inputs to generate a clear and actionable task list during sprint planning. In this part, we are focusing on the sprint planning meeting as a critical tool used during the Identify Tasks process. The sprint planning meeting is a foundational event where the Scrum team, comprising the Scrum Master, product owner, and development team, gathers at the beginning of each sprint to plan the actual work. In this meeting, the team takes each committed user story and breaks it down into smaller actionable activities known as tasks. These tasks define the practical steps needed to implement the user story's deliverables and meet the acceptance criteria associated with it. It is important to note that the product owner is also present in this meeting. Their presence is essential to provide clarifications or additional details about the committed user stories, especially when the team faces choices that impact design, functionality, or priority. This collaborative and clarifying setup helps reduce misunderstandings and ensures a shared understanding of what needs to be done during the sprint. Overview. The task list is the primary output of the Identify Tasks process. It is the team's contract with itself for the sprint, a single comprehensive checklist of everything that must be done to transform the committed user stories into a shippable product increment. What the task list contains: 1. All committed tasks: development, testing, documentation, integration, deployment, and any required spike or research work. 2. A brief, actionable description of each task so that any team member can pick it up without ambiguity. 3. Effort estimates, typically in hours or ideal days, that were agreed during the Identify Tasks discussion. Why testing and integration tasks matter. Scrum treats a sprint as a mini-project that must end in a potentially releasable product. If testing, integration, or environment setup tasks are forgotten now, they will become bottlenecks later and jeopardize the definition of done. Granularity. Tasks are often activity-based. Create API endpoint, write unit tests, update user documentation. The team, not the product owner, decides how deep to decompose. Rule of thumb: if a task is so large that its progress can't be seen within a day or two, break it down further. Living document. The task list is not frozen. If the team discovers new subtasks during the sprint, they add them, re-estimate, and continue. Transparency plus daily updates keep the whole team aligned. Takeaway message: a well-crafted task list gives the team clarity, visibility, and confidence. It turns broad user stories into a concrete execution plan that everyone can track in daily stand-ups and against the sprint burn-down chart. In this slide, we focus on the process of estimating the effort required to complete tasks identified in the sprint. Inputs to this process include the Scrum core team, which is responsible for driving this estimation. The task list, generated in the previous step, which contains all activities for the sprint. User story acceptance criteria, which ensures the team understands the expected outcome for each story. Additional factors like dependencies between tasks and any identified risks that may impact time or resources. Lastly, Scrum guidance. Body recommendations may guide best practices in effort estimation. The tools used in this step are sprint planning meetings, where the team collaborates to estimate each task. Estimation criteria, which define what elements, such as complexity, effort, or risk, must be considered. Estimation methods, such as planning poker, t-shirt sizing, or expert judgment, help the team assign effort values. The output is a well-documented effort-estimated task list. This list will form the basis of the sprint execution plan and helps in tracking progress throughout the sprint. Accurate estimation is critical because it directly affects the team's ability to deliver the sprint goal and manage capacity effectively. In this segment, we are revisiting two key inputs that play a crucial role in the effort estimation process: the Scrum core team and the task list. Since we've already covered these in earlier discussions, let's briefly reinforce their importance in the current context. The Scrum core team, which includes the Scrum Master, Product Owner, and Development Team, is the driving force behind estimation. Their shared understanding of the product vision, technical feasibility, and development capacity enables more accurate estimations. Because they will be executing the tasks, their involvement ensures ownership and realistic planning. The second critical input is the task list. This list is the outcome of the Identify Tasks step and includes all the granular tasks required to deliver the committed user stories. Each task in this list must be estimated for effort so that the team can plan its work effectively during the sprint. While these inputs have already been introduced, in the context of effort estimation, They serve as the foundational elements on which the accuracy and feasibility of the sprint plan depend. In this section, we will explore estimation criteria as a key tool used during the effort estimation process in Scrum. Estimation criteria help define how effort is measured for tasks identified in the sprint. Two widely used approaches to define estimation criteria are story points and ideal time. Story points are a popular unit of measurement used to express relative effort. Rather than measuring exact time, story points compare the effort involved in one task against others. It accounts for complexity, risk, and effort, which makes it suitable for agile projects where unpredictability is common. On the other hand, ideal time refers to the actual number of hours a team member would require to complete a task if they could work on it without any interruptions. This is useful for tasks that are well understood and don't involve much uncertainty. Both approaches help the team consistently estimate effort and develop a shared understanding of workload. More importantly, they support transparency and predictability, allowing the team to identify bottlenecks and adjust planning strategies accordingly. Now let us focus on estimation methods, which are instrumental in estimating the effort for tasks during the sprint. The same methods that are used to estimate user stories are also applied here to estimate individual tasks. These include well-known techniques such as planning poker, wideband Delphi, and affinity estimation. These methods are collaborative and consensus-based, meaning the entire Scrum team discusses and agrees on the level of effort required. This not only helps in producing more accurate estimates, but also enhances team alignment and shared understanding of the work involved. The purpose of applying these estimation methods at the task level is to break down the user stories into smaller work units and accurately assign effort values to each. This makes the planning more realistic and manageable. Importantly, the Scrum team adapts the selected method to suit the complexity of the tasks and the team's experience level, ensuring the estimates remain practical and achievable. In this section, we will discuss the effort estimated task list, which is the final output of the task estimation process. This list includes all the tasks associated with the committed user stories selected for a sprint. What distinguishes this list is that each task comes with an effort estimate, calculated using the estimation criteria previously agreed upon by the Scrum team, whether that's in story points or ideal time. The effort estimated task list is not just a record. It plays a crucial role in planning. It is actively used in sprint planning meetings to build two key tools. 1. The sprint backlog, which defines what will be delivered in the sprint 2. The sprint burn-down chart, which tracks progress on a daily basis. Furthermore, this list helps the team make informed decisions, such as determining if they need to scale back their commitment or if there's room to add more work based on capacity. This ensures that the team does not overcommit and can deliver the highest priority items effectively and sustainably. In this slide, we are focusing on the final step of the plan and estimate phase, creating the sprint backlog. The sprint backlog is a detailed list of tasks the Scrum team commits to completing in the upcoming sprint. It is created during the sprint planning meeting using various inputs, such as the effort estimated task list, which provides detailed effort values for each task. The length of the sprint, which defines how much can realistically be completed. Dependencies and the team calendar, which influence the sequencing and availability of team members. The tools used in this process include Sprint Planning Meeting, where the team finalizes what they can deliver. Sprint Tracking Tools and Metrics, which help in visualizing progress and workload. The primary outputs are 1. The sprint backlog, which is the actionable to-do list for the team. 2. The sprint burn-down chart, which visually shows how much work remains each day. This process ensures that the team has complete clarity on their work and can self-organize effectively to meet the sprint goal. In this slide, we will briefly revisit the critical inputs required to create the sprint backlog, which we have already discussed in detail earlier. 1. Scrum Core Team. The Scrum Core Team, which includes the Scrum Master, Product Owner, and Development Team, plays a central role in creating the sprint backlog. Their combined insights ensure that the right tasks are selected and appropriately prioritized to meet the sprint goal. 2. Effort Estimated Task List. This is the primary reference document for the team during the sprint planning meeting. It contains tasks that have already been broken down from user stories and have estimated effort values assigned. These estimates guide the team in deciding how many tasks can realistically be completed within the sprint. 3. Length of sprint. The duration of the sprint, which is usually time-boxed to 1 to 4 weeks, directly influences how much work the team can commit to. A shorter sprint allows for quicker feedback, while a longer sprint can accommodate more complex tasks. The team must align the workload with the available time to avoid overcommitment. These inputs together create a well-balanced and realistic sprint backlog that reflects the team's capacity and project needs. In this slide, we are emphasizing the role of sprint planning meetings as a critical tool in the process of creating the sprint backlog. During sprint planning meetings, the Scrum team meets to plan the upcoming sprint in detail. This is the session where user stories are formally committed for the sprint based on priority and estimated effort. The effort estimated task list is used to break down these committed user stories into smaller, manageable tasks. Each Scrum team member selects tasks based on their expertise, availability, and comfort level with specific types of work. This structured collaboration ensures workload balance and ownership within the team. Moreover, the sprint backlog and the sprint burn-down chart are generated during this meeting. These two artifacts guide the team throughout the sprint, helping track daily progress and staying aligned with the sprint goal. This meeting is fundamental in setting the tone, expectations, and clarity for what the team aims to deliver during the sprint. In this part, we are discussing one of the most important outputs of the sprint planning process, the sprint backlog. The sprint backlog is essentially the complete list of tasks the Scrum team has agreed to work on during the sprint. These tasks originate from the committed user stories and are selected based on the team's capacity, skill set, and estimation of effort. Typically, the sprint backlog is visualized using a Scrum board or a task board. This visual representation allows both the Scrum team and stakeholders to constantly track the status and progress of work items throughout the sprint. Another critical aspect of the sprint backlog is the inclusion of risks. Any risks identified during sprint planning are added to the backlog, along with mitigating tasks if applicable. This ensures that risk management becomes an integral part of daily work execution. It is important to note that once the sprint backlog is finalized, the team should not accept new user stories during the ongoing sprint. However, if the team finds any missing tasks related to the already committed user stories, those can be added after discussion and agreement. If new requirements are discovered during the sprint, they are redirected to the product owner and logged into the prioritized product backlog for consideration in future sprints. In this part, we are discussing one of the most important outputs of the sprint planning process, the sprint backlog. The sprint backlog is essentially the complete list of tasks the Scrum team has agreed to work on during the sprint. These tasks originate from the committed user stories and are selected based on the team's capacity, skill set, and estimation of effort. Typically, the sprint backlog is visualized using a Scrum board or a task board. This visual representation allows both the Scrum team and stakeholders to constantly track the status and progress of work items throughout the sprint. Another critical aspect of the sprint backlog is the inclusion of risks. Any risks identified during sprint planning are added to the backlog, along with mitigating tasks if applicable. This ensures that risk management becomes an integral part of daily work execution. It is important to note that once the sprint backlog is finalized, the team should not accept new user stories during the ongoing sprint. However, if the team finds any missing tasks related to the already committed user stories, those can be added after discussion and agreement. If new requirements are discovered during the sprint, they are redirected to the product owner and logged into the prioritized product backlog for consideration in future sprints. This slide illustrates the Scrum org as it appears at the beginning of a sprint. At this stage, the sprint backlog has just been created, and most of the work is yet to begin. The Scrum org is typically divided into three primary columns. To Do, which contains tasks or user stories that have been committed for the sprint but not yet started. Work in Progress, WIP, which includes tasks that are currently being worked on by team members. Done, where completed tasks are moved once finished and accepted. Since this is the beginning of the sprint, almost all items will be in the To Do column. On the right side of the board, we also see the Sprint Goals section, outlining what the team aims to achieve. The Burn Down Chart, a tool for tracking progress by visualizing remaining work. Sections labeled Unplanned Items and Next, which allow teams to manage unforeseen tasks or prepare for upcoming work. This visual management tool enables the Scrum team to stay aligned, maintain transparency, and quickly assess the sprint's progress in daily stand-ups. This slide focuses on one of the mandatory outputs of the sprint planning process, the Sprint Burn Down Chart. The Sprint Burn Down Chart is a visual graph that represents the amount of work remaining in the ongoing sprint. It provides a clear day-by-day view of progress and helps determine whether the team is on track to complete the sprint backlog on time. At the beginning of the sprint, this chart is usually initialized with a planned burn-down line, a straight path showing the ideal rate at which work should be completed daily. As the sprint progresses, the chart is updated daily to reflect the actual amount of work remaining. If the actual progress line deviates significantly from the planned line, indicating that tasks are not being completed as expected, the Scrum Master must intervene. They should investigate any obstacles or impediments and work proactively to remove them, enabling the team to get back on track. A similar and complementary chart is the Sprint Burn-Up Chart, which instead shows the amount of work completed during the sprint rather than what remains. Both charts are essential tools for tracking sprint progress and ensuring transparency within the Scrum team and stakeholders. This slide visually demonstrates the Sprint Burn Down Chart, which is a mandatory output of sprint planning and daily tracking. The x-axis represents the sprint days, and the y-axis shows the story points, which quantify the total work to be completed. We can observe two lines on this chart. The blue line indicates the planned burn down, representing the ideal pace at which the team should complete the work. The red line represents the actual progress, updated daily based on the team's completion of tasks. Here, the chart begins with 300 story points and trends down to 0 by day 6, which is the sprint end. Notice that on some days, actual progress, red line, lags behind the plan. This is normal and provides important signals. For example, around day 3 and day 4, the actuals were slightly behind the planned pace. This is when the Scrum Master should step in to explore any roadblocks or inefficiencies. By day 6, the actual line catches up, indicating that the team has managed to complete the committed work by the end of the sprint. This kind of real-time visibility ensures the team remains aware of their progress and can take corrective actions early if needed. This slide presents a case study of Sprint Number 1 planning, focusing on the selection of items from the prioritized product backlog. Here we see a list of epics, or user stories, each assigned a priority level, must or should, a relative ranking, 1 to n priority, and an estimate in story points, SP. The velocity for this sprint is 21, which means the development team has the capacity to complete 21 story points worth of work in this sprint. From the top of the backlog, stories are selected in priority order until the story point limit is reached. For example, the first 5 stories are all must-haves and add up to 5 plus 8 plus 3 plus 3 plus 2 equals 21 SP. This selection fills the available velocity perfectly, making them ideal candidates for Sprint Number 1. Stories ranked lower, like payment options and recurring deliveries, are marked as should, which means they are important but not critical for this sprint. They can be deferred to future sprints. This process ensures that the team works on the most valuable and high-priority features first, maximizing business impact while staying within realistic delivery capacity. This slide outlines the final content selected for Sprint 1, based on the team's velocity of 21 story points. The selection includes 4 high-priority, must, user stories, as shown in the table. These were selected from the top of the prioritized product backlog, in order of importance. Let's walk through the chosen stories. 1. Secure protocol, estimated at 5 story points. 2. Create a unique user profile with payment information. 8 story points. 3. Browse whole catalog. 5 story points. 4. Browse using filters. 3 story points. These selections exactly total 21 story points, fully utilizing the team's capacity for Sprint 1. Each user story has been mapped to Sprint Number 1, as seen in the last 2 columns, Sprint Number and Sprint Total. This approach ensures the team commits to a realistic workload, based on their velocity, while focusing on the most essential and high-value features for delivery.